I was talking to a developer the other day, and the topic came up of manipulating data or changing data within a JET-based table, and how simple it was or how difficult it was. They just wanted to, like, talk about what are the different ways of doing that. So I thought I'd put together this recording really quick and just show different ways of doing that. So going to the JET website here, you can get here by oraclejet.org from any browser, and using the cookbook. The data collection section of the cookbook provides all the different types of components. We're going to look at table. And the table has a lot of different options that you can, different ways of getting data into the table. But it doesn't necessarily show a ton about how to manipulate that. And so I wanted to kind of talk about it to begin with. If you plan to do a lot of CRUD type operations, so creating, updating, deleting, modifying data in that context, you may very well want to take a look at the common model instead of just doing what I'm going to show here in a second. The common model is a Backbone JS syntax-based system. The API is based on the Backbone syntax, and it really is probably the best way to go about dealing with all those CRUD operations with .save and .delete and things of that nature. So take a look at that if you're really looking to get into some complex stuff with the whole range of CRUD operations. What I want to show today in this video is just really how to work with AJAX and get JSON and things of that nature. If you're more familiar with working with arrays directly, this is actually a really simple way to manipulate arrays and then update them. At the foundation of JET itself, we use Knockout for all the data binding. So really, that's where you want to start. This default table that comes up when you go to the table options is a great example for just showing how things are set up. In that, this is how you would set up the HTML, and this is how you'd set up the JavaScript. And it just gives you a static array, and then it does the data binding, or excuse me, it actually sets up the data source variable here by setting up an OJ array table data source and just passing in that static array, which is really easy if you're just wanting to throw together some data really quickly. But there's an easier thing to do if you're actually going to be updating that data and modifying it, and that is to take a look at this Knockout observable array and using a table with an observable array. Personally, I think this is where you should start if you're going to work with arrays anyway. This is just the place to go. And it's the same setup. The table is set up exactly the same. It's using data source as the value for the data option. And you'll notice down here in the JavaScript, again, we're setting up our static array, just as we did before. But now we're actually setting up a Knockout observable called depth observable array, and then we're adding the department array into that. What this does is it starts to hook us into Knockout and allow us to use the power of Knockout to tell the table when something has changed. So all I have to do, now that I've defined this as an observable, and data source is actually set up using that observable, if I want to change what's displayed in that table, all I have to do is change what's in the observable. I don't have to do any refreshes. I don't have to do anything else. Just change that observable, and the table will automatically update. So let's go ahead. I'm going to add a button underneath this table that's going to manipulate some data or add some data into this table. So let's do that really quick. There's a little bit of housekeeping I got to do in order to show off this demo. So I'm going to add a little container div here really quick, and I'll explain in just a second why I'm doing that. But I'm just going to give it an ID of container. And let's close that out at the bottom. The reason I'm doing this is that the current demo is set up so that the example, the view model that's down here, has apply bindings. It's actually attached to the table element itself. And I want to add a button in there, and I want it to be of the connected to the same view model. So I'm going to set up the binding to the container, which is outside of there. And let's continue adding in our button here. So I'm going to add a couple of BRs really quick, just so I can get my button to show up down at the bottom below the table where I want it. I'm going to have a button. I'm going to do a data bind. And I'm going to do a click binding on it, and I'm just going to go to a function called add data. Okay, so it's very simple on that in that area there. Now let's go down here into the view model itself and add in our function. So we'll just call that self.addData. And then inside of this, when we actually click on that button, we're just going to add another element into there. So again, as I said, all I have to do is modify this observable. So we're going to take that, we're going to do a push, and let's push in another element into that array. Object. Put that there. Let's change the name. And we'll change that value really quick. Now, of course, there's all kinds of other stuff we could do in here, you know, to make sure the values are unique and so forth, but this is just really, really simple. So we're going to update that. You'll notice now up at the top here, we've got our add button, or our add data button, and when I click on it, it adds in an extra row to the table. So that's really simple. I mean, I didn't do anything to refresh that table. All I'm doing is updating that observable array, and the table automatically is listening to and it knows how to update itself through the knockout binding. So let's take this a little bit further and let's do a JSON. I happen to know that the other demo off to the right over here that uses ojCollection happens to call a local JSON file using getJSON. So I'm going to steal that. And since then I know that I have a REST call that actually will work. And I'm going to jump back over here and I'm just going to say inside this function, I'm going to say do that. And I'm going to use the built-in promise capabilities that are returned from an AJAX call, so that I'm going to wait until my data is actually returned, and then I'm going to do a function, we'll call it data that's coming back. Close that out. Now inside of this is where I'm going to actually update my observable again. So this time, instead of actually adding a row, let's just update the data entirely. So let's go in here and let's just change the observable and completely replace all of the data so that we add whatever's coming back from this JSON call. Now I happen to know that when this departments.json, it actually contains an array of elements, and if I just do data, I'm going to get nothing in return. So I'm going to say that I want data.departments, and that will actually work for me. I'll show you a trick in just a second as to how I learned that, because I didn't know that when I first started doing this and setting up this demo, but I'll show you. So let's save that. And now you'll notice that this is our original table that we had. Now when we add the data, we're going to make that REST call and completely replace it with new data that came back from that REST call. So for those that aren't familiar with the JET website, you'll notice that each of these demos actually has an HTML editor and a JSON or a JavaScript editor. And as you've probably noticed already by now, I'm actually able to edit the code directly in these demos and just hit the apply changes, and it'll update the demo up above. So they have a little bit more built into them, in that when I was doing this before and I was calling data, I didn't, like I said, I didn't get the data back that I expected. So I can type in debugger and pull up the developer tools for Chrome here, and this will work in any of the browsers, but I can pull this up. Now that I have that in there, I can apply my changes, come back up and click on my button, and you see it actually hits that as a breakpoint, and I can go over and look at my object, and there I found out that, okay, I actually have to do data.departments in order to get down to the individual elements that I wanted, which is the department ID and department name and so forth. So that's a really quick way to work with that debugger environment, and how to work inside of the JET website itself, just to test some different things. You don't have to do a lot of craziness in here. One thing that I will also point out, besides just the debugging, is if you want to update something in the page, make a change in one of the tables and just hit apply changes. I just entered a space there and it allowed me to. That will refresh it back to its original state, but keep your changes in the code. If you do a refresh on the page, it's not going to save all the changes that you've made, and you're going to start back over from scratch. So if you want to keep the things that you've worked on, yet you want to update or refresh the demo, the rendered data itself, just add or remove a little space in here and then hit apply changes, and that'll update it for you. So just a little tip and a trick there for working with it. So that's how you can quickly update data in an ojTable. I hope that benefits somebody down the road, and happy coding.